The Phantom Menace was the best of the Star Wars prequel trilogies, and I don't even have to try to defend Jar Jar Binks in order to be able to establish that as definitive, objective fact. I know everyone always wants to go to Revenge of the Sith because it was the darkest, and we got Anakin's fall. But the entire problem with the prequel trilogies, in terms of storytelling, was Anakin's fall, because George Lucas did not want to face having to write that story. George Lucas, as a matured older fellow who'd had kids and had had life experiences, was no longer the same young upstart director that he was when he first got out of college. Star Wars, despite being cinematically told in a very old-fashioned way and adopting a bunch of very classic storytelling tropes from mythology and literature, it was still edgy, but what he wanted to make as an older person when he wanted to go back to Star Wars was kids' movies. And you can't do that, really, now, can you? When your central protagonist is a dude who at some point is going to have to go on a murderous rampage and become a great villain. I don't know what all George Lucas had immersed himself in while preparing himself to write these things, but he obviously has kind of poor insight into the notions of what drives people to quote-unquote villainy. And what should have been a very dark magnum opus ended up being, well, cartoonish, because he's trying to tell a kid's story. But in The Phantom Menace, it's the most furthest removed from all those events. And so in that one, he was the most free to actually present his prequel universe, the vision of the Old Republic, the way he wanted to, without having to be overly clouded with the responsibilities of telling a story about someone, going from being a great friend and comrade in war to switching sides and helping betray and murder all of his former comrades. I think a lot of the question I really have is what books or movies specifically was George Lucas digging into? Or was he on an ego trip and just pulling stuff entirely out of his mind? And that's why it does seem to have a very kind of poor grasp of villainy and rage, because George Lucas doesn't seem to have much of that in him. He's just a nice little fellow, little hippie guy, grown up, has his causes. I can understand him wanting to just put it all down and walk away. But I can also understand him having regrets and second thoughts about that now, especially as the fans are now doing their thing, which I kind of, hey, we started this antagonistic trend back during the prequel era, so I'm not really sure if Disney fully understood what it was they were buying into, or if the antagonism and the negativity coming from Lucasfilm is actually all part of a devious marketing strategy. Negative press. Who knows? But there's other things about The Phantom Menace beyond just from the storycraft of it being the episode that George Lucas was the freest to express what it is that he was wanting to do with the Star Wars universe then and there without being too tied to all the old baggage. There's also the fact that you have Qui-Gon Jinn. I know tons of channels, especially Thor Skywalker, which I would recommend, has gone into good detail about all the reasons why Qui-Gon Jinn is badass. You don't need me to stand here and tell you why Qui-Gon Jinn was the perfect Jedi, and yet in his very concept, Why on earth was he never mentioned to Luke by anybody? Obi-Wan's ghost is like, oh yes, Yoda, go see Yoda, the Jedi Master that trained me. And during afternoon classes when I was in Jedi elementary school, we'll not talk about my actual master, Qui-Gon Jinn, because even though he's a Force ghost, he's not here to talk to you, only me. Anyway, Qui-Gon kind of stood out for being like, who the hell is this guy? He's not supposed to be here. But in spite of that, he's badass. He's the perfect Jedi, the best Jedi presentation of all the Jedi shown, even more so than Yoda. The most in tune with the living Force. The real, like, overarch plot stuff that's in episode 1 is really all about Palpatine. And, like, as time has gone on, people have seen that better. I remember at the time, though, like, some people being a little confused because I don't think George Lucas painted that picture well enough of that was going on. The prequel trilogy as a whole also suffers from the fact that the wrong person is the main character. Anakin Skywalker should not have been the main character. He should have been a side character, and the main character should have been Obi-Wan Kenobi as a young man. And he should have been the Luke of that trilogy. And then Luke was the Obi-Wan of his trilogy. And the villain just happens to be Obi-Wan and his old friend. I think that would have actually also kind of given it more of a samurai movie kind of feel too, and stuff like that. He takes the son of his former comrade turned enemy, and he's going to raise him himself, except in this one he lets some other people. Maybe like Owen and Beru weren't even related to him. They were just, bribed into telling the kid that they were his uncle. Who knows? It's not like Skywalker is their last name. There's a lot of different things that have been done with this trilogy. And that's the stuff that shows up the most in episodes 2 and 3. I mean, everyone, we all know episode 2 is a flaming trash fire of boredom and horrible romance. Because that's another thing George Lucas is not good at, is he's not good at romance. Like all the good romantic stuff in the original trilogy, the classic trilogy, that was all the stuff that was brought in largely from the screenwriters that were hired for Empire and Return, who had a better grasp of how to write these things. Because Lucas would not have pulled that off very well, as we can see. I mean, so that doesn't take any sort of clairvoyance to looking back in time to judge that one. But also the other two prequels, episodes 2 and 3, compared to 1, were filmed differently. Those two were almost entirely blue screen movies. George Lucas basically filming from his couch, and actors who were not well directed having to interact with tennis balls on the end of sticks in a big blue room or a big green room. That's bullshit. And it shows throughout both of them. They're poorly acted. The scenery and the effects have not aged well, let us say. But in episode 1, there is more practical set use. The stuff that had actually been physically built for people to walk around in, and they actually went to physical, real locations more often. Not just plush green ones and fields of flowers, conveniently. So from storytelling craft to the fact that it introduced what is, in my consideration, the best representation of what a Jedi Knight's supposed to be, and the fact that the filmmaking was better and more personal, all these things combined outweigh the Jar Jar thing enough that episode 1 should be considered the best of the Star Wars prequel trilogy. Because yes, even if episode 3 had the fall of Anakin was mishandled terribly. So, and he could have, from the way episode 1 ended, the way it was, he could have continued on making Obi-Wan the more central person. But no, this little kid that they meet halfway through the movie apparently is the main character. Bullshit.